In December 1943, German pilots climbed into the cold sky, certain of their supremacy, veterans of Poland, France, Russia, aces with hundreds of victories, men forged in fire and myth. But on that winter morning, they looked up and froze. Sleek silver shapes closing fast, blades cutting the air like steel, engines singing a new and terrifying song. Mustangs, they are here, crackled a German voice, quiet with shock. The P-51 was not just another fighter, it was the turning point of the air war. Designed in just 102 days, transformed by the British Merlin engine, and backed by a nation whose factories thundered day and night, America unleashed not a plane, but a system, democracy in aluminum, horsepower, and discipline. 15,586 Mustangs built, pilots trained 400 hours before combat, radios and fuel and escorts, stretching 600 miles deep into Reich territory. And on the other side, Germany bleeding time and fuel, sending boys with 80 hours of training to face seasoned Americans in the sky. The Luftwaffe, once untouchable, now hunted. Mustangs cut through bomber lines and dove into fighter formations, striking at airfields, trains, fuel depots, chasing Messerschmitts across the clouds like angels of judgment. Every flight a reminder, the age of German air power was ending. Aces like Galland and Rahl watched their skies slip away, not through lack of courage, but through the crushing weight of industrial might and relentless strategy. By April 1945, the Luftwaffe, once master of Europe, was a ghost, its wings broken by men in leather jackets and sunlight-silvered Mustangs who never stopped coming, never stopped climbing, and never let the enemy breathe again. Winter 1943. The European sky is steel gray and merciless, a battlefield suspended between clouds and fire. For 4 years, Nazi Germany had commanded these heavens with iron confidence. Their pilots, hardened veterans with names whispered in Allied briefings, Günther Rahl, Adolf Galland, Gerhard Barkhorn men who learned to kill in the skies of Poland, France, the Soviet Union. Their fighters, the Bf 109 and FW 190, had once been symbols of speed, dominance, and a seemingly unstoppable Reich. Europe lay beneath them, burning, conquered, trembling under the shadow of the Luftwaffe's wings. But by late 1943, something had changed. The war on the ground was beginning to turn, and Germany's Air Force, while still deadly, felt the strain of exhaustion. Fuel shortages, fewer seasoned pilots, factories bombed, skies fuller every day with American bombers crossing the channel like an iron tide. The U.S. 8th Air Force, a young, relentless giant, pushed its B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators deeper into German airspace. Yet every mile closer to Berlin came with a price. Shattered bombers falling in black smoke, spirals, crews burning, parachutes drifting like dead flowers in winter wind. American bomber. Crews would chant a grim prayer before missions. Lord, if we go down today, let it be quick. They had courage, they had numbers, they had steel, but they did not yet have control. You could feel it in briefing rooms, tension tightening every jaw. In London pubs, pilots raising glasses, knowing 1 in 5 might not return. In factories across America, mothers and machinists working side by side, stamping metal wings to bring their sons home again. This was a nation that had crossed oceans, not to conquer, but to end conquest. Yet even with its industrial heartbeat pounding, even with its promise to liberate Europe, America faced a question that echoed through every airfield. How do you defeat an enemy who once owned the sky? The stakes were nothing less than the fate of the war. If the bombers couldn't break Germany's war machine, Allied armies would bleed endlessly, victory delayed or lost. The Luftwaffe was battered, but not broken. Adolf Galland himself famously told Hitler, "Give me 100 Spitfires and I will defend Germany." He believed in his pilots. He believed in the Reich's air legacy. He believed they could still win the sky. But then, quietly at first, like a whisper across the clouds, a new sound entered the European air war, a deeper growl, a smoother hum. At bases in England, a sleek silhouette rolled onto runways, long fuselage, razor wings, a loping stride of confidence. Mechanics paused, bomber crews stared. German spotters would soon do the same. The North American P-51 Mustang, born not from decades of polished doctrine, but from desperation, innovation, and raw American engineering speed, a fighter designed in just 102 days. Perfected with a British Merlin engine, given wings by a nation that turned farmland into factories and teenagers into pilots in 400 hours of training, where Germany sent boys with barely 80 hours to die in flame, America forged aviators in patience, fuel, and discipline. The 354th Fighter Group, the Pioneer Mustang Group, would be among the first to taste what this aircraft could do. When they climbed into the cockpit, canopy sliding shut like a knight lowering his visor, they felt something different. Control, reach, freedom. And when they roared east behind bomber streams, deep into German heartland farther than any Allied fighter had gone before they carried more than machine guns and drop tanks. They carried a new truth. The sky was no longer German. Why is this story worth hearing? Because it is not just about speed or firepower. It is not about flags or metal. It is about a moment in history when skill met industry, when free people outtrained and outproduced a regime built on fear. It is about young men, American and German alike, facing each other in the wind, each believing they fought for their world's survival. It is about courage, sacrifice, and the turning of an age. And it is about a simple, brutal reality of war. Sometimes victory is not won by the bravest, but by the side that can outlast the fire. Winter weighed heavy over Europe in late 1943. The war had raged for 4 brutal years, swallowing nations, skies, futures. Beneath freezing clouds and the echo of distant explosions, a continent held its breath. The Third Reich, once sweeping across Europe like a storm, now felt the bitter pull of resistance on every front, yet in the air. They still believed they ruled. The Luftwaffe had been the spearhead of Hitler's conquest, the instrument that shattered Poland in weeks, humbled France in days, and carved dominance into the European sky. And though the tide of war had begun to shift on the ground, Russia pushing west, Italy collapsing, Germany's pilots still held a terrifying legacy. Experience, ruthlessness, and an instinct for aerial killing that had been sharpened since 1939. These were men like Günther Röhl, the calm tactician with nerves of steel, third highest scoring ace in history. Adolf Galland, sharp-eyed, fearless, his cigar clenched between teeth even as he challenged Hitler to his face. Erich Hartmann, a quiet young man with an extraordinary gift for flight and lethal patience. They were legends, saints of the sky to some, executioners to others. Behind them stood squadrons forged in fire, Jagdgeschwader 52, 26, 54 names that echoed through briefing rooms in London and Washington. Across the Channel, the airfields of England buzzed with an entirely different energy. Harder, grimmer, but determined. American bomb groups, the 8th Air Force, had finally arrived in full force. Rows of B-17, flying fortresses, and B-24 Liberators stretched across frozen tarmac like sleeping giants waiting to roar awake. The U.S. had come late to the war, but once in motion, its energy felt unstoppable, factories roaring, youth pouring into training bases, nations rallying behind the promise to end tyranny, not simply survive it. Yet, for all their might, the Americans faced a cruel reality. Flying into Germany was a death sentence. Bomber crews learned it quickly. The German flak guns, the dreaded 88 seconds, tore the sky apart with black blossoms of steel, and beyond them, climbing fast with practiced precision, came the fighters. Messerschmitts diving with sun at their backs, Focke-Wulfs slashing through bomber formations like wolves through cattle. No escort could follow the bombers all the way. When American fighters turned back for fuel over Belgium or the Netherlands, German pilots whispered a cold phrase into their radios: "The bombers are alone." And then the slaughter began. No one fully understood what was coming, not even the men who strapped themselves into cockpits and breathed frost off cold glass canopies. But soon, they would know. Soon, the world would watch something impossible begin to unfold: the fall of an air force once feared beyond measure. The Mustangs were ready. The Reich was cornered. And fate was circling above them like a patient hawk, waiting for the fight to begin. The winter sky over Germany did not roar at first, it hummed. A strange sound, distant, unfamiliar, yet unmistakably dangerous. Luftwaffe spotters scanned the horizon from their airfields, seeing silver glints riding the cold wind. At first, they thought it was the usual bomber stream. Then they noticed the escorts, sleeker, faster, not thunderbolts, not lightnings. Something new, something unnerving. It began like a breath held too long. High above the clouds, B-17 formations pushed toward industrial heartland targets. Engines thundered in perfect mechanical rhythm, contrails stretching like chalk lines across heaven. Inside those bombers, men sat tense and silent gunners, gripping their handles, radios hissing nervously, waist gunners peering out frosted windows for a flash of yellow nose or black cross. They knew what came next. They always knew. Then the call, bandits, 12 o'clock high. Like wolves erupting from fog, Messerschmitts dove in formation 109 seconds, slicing down in perfect formation attacks drilled since the Blitz. Tracers streaked red across the sky. Bomber guns opened up, chattering like angry steel rain. The sky turned violent in an instant, explosions blooming like black flowers, aluminum tearing, engines coughing fire. For a heartbeat, it was familiar, the deadly dance that had cost the U.S. thousands of airmen. But this time, something changed. A new voice crackled through American radios. Calm, almost casual. Red leader to all squadrons, Mustangs, engage. From above and behind, like falcons descending on crows, the P-51 seconds dropped into the fight. Merlin engines screamed as throttles opened. Sleek, silver wings cut through cloud and flak like lightning. German pilots, used to brief duels before the escorts peeled away, suddenly found themselves stalked, outclimbed, outturned, outrun, outthought. Günther Rahl later said, "It was as if a guillotine fell across the sky." American pilot Lieutenant Don Bryan rolled his Mustang and dove, lining up a 109 climbing toward the bombers. He squeezed the trigger 6. 50 cals spat fire, rounds tearing through the German fuselage in clean, brutal precision. The Messerschmitt burst into flame, spiraling toward white fields below. Another Mustang pilot, Captain John Meyer, radioed as he shredded an F tableau 190 trying to break away. "He's smoking, finishing him." For the Germans, shock turned to dread. They tried climbing the Mustangs, climbed higher. They tried diving the Mustangs, dove faster. They tried to escape at full throttle. The Mustangs closed the distance like predators scenting blood. Adolf Galland, watching later engagements, muttered, "We had nothing left to fight them with." One Luftwaffe rookie, barely 19, panicked as a Mustang slid onto his tail. He dove too steeply, lost control, and vanished into cloud. His wingman whispered a prayer before turning into hopeless combat. This was not the measured dominance of early war aces. This was survival against a new kind of hunter. Even the sky seemed to shift sides. Mustangs moved in disciplined packs, not reckless duels, but coordinated screens, weaving through bomber formations, diving and climbing in deadly rhythm. Every time a German fighter tried to reach the bombers, a Mustang appeared silent, swift, merciless. And below, bombs fell. The industrial arteries of the Reich trembled and burst under American steel. Train yards erupted, oil plants burned, assembly lines choked on ash, the Luftwaffe's lungs fuel. Replacement aircraft, training infrastructure collapsed bit by bit. Flak exploded around everyone, friend and foe, adding chaos to terror. Shrapnel cut through wings, windshields cracked, engines screamed under stress. Bombers limped, Mustangs bled smoke, and still they fought because turning back was not an option. At one point, a German ace radioed simply, "Defeated, they are everywhere." He wasn't exaggerating. The Mustang didn't just win dogfights, it erased the Luftwaffe's ability to fight at all. From Berlin to the Ruhr to Vienna, the same scene repeated. Bombers arrive, Luftwaffe rises to strike. Mustangs descend like thunder and break them apart mid-air. Pilot by pilot, squadron by squadron, the German Air Force dissolved. Not through lack of courage, but through exhaustion, attrition, and relentless, unanswerable pressure. By some missions in early 1945, American escort fighters arrived over target zones and found nothing. No interceptors, no challenge, just empty sky. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of Europe, had been silenced. And above the smoking landscape, P-51 seconds circled, engines purring like victorious lions, watching the future unfold beneath them. The tide had turned. The air war, and the war itself, had changed forever. The sky did not change in a single day, but the men who fought in it felt the shift like a sudden breath after drowning. After those first brutal clashes where the P-51 Mustang carved into the Luftwaffe's confidence, a new reality took hold over Europe. The hunters had become the hunted, and the German pilots who once climbed eagerly into battle now climbed with dread, knowing the odds had inverted in a single winter season. For the Americans, the missions remained dangerous. Bombers still came home shredded, gunners still died at their stations, Mustangs still returned, with holes punched through fuselages and wings dripping fuel. But the fear, the sick, silent fear of flying into the Reich alone began to fade. Air crews stepped into briefing rooms with shoulders straighter, not because danger had disappeared, but because hope had finally arrived in the form of a long-nosed silver guardian. Veteran bomber gunner Harold Chase later remembered, "It was the first time we felt we weren't being sacrificed." When Mustangs escorted B-17 seconds all the way to Berlin and back, morale shifted overnight. Where once crews counted luck, they now counted Mustangs in the formation and believed in returning home. Pilots walked the flight line with a new steadiness in their boots. Ground crews touched the P-51 seconds, not like metal tools, but like sacred armor. Across the Channel, in Germany, the change hit harder. Luftwaffe command reports became desperate, tense. Losses rose to impossible numbers, not just aircraft, but irreplaceable veterans. Each fallen ace was more than one man. He represented thousands of hours of training, years of knowledge, the spine of a once-invincible air force. Now, young German pilots scrambled into cockpits with trembling hands, barely trained, barely believing. Many died on their first combat mission. Some survived only because they fled. Fuel shortages grew crippling. The Allies bombed refineries relentlessly, and Mustangs hunted fuel convoys like lions, stalking prey. Luftwaffe units grounded entire squadrons simply because they had no fuel to fly. Aircraft sat untouched, beautiful and useless, while Mustang patrols prowled overhead like circling hawks, waiting for movement. One German instructor admitted bitterly, "We had planes, we had boys, we had no sky." Civilians felt it too. In Berlin, factory workers looked up as bombers filled the heavens and realized the Luftwaffe could no longer shield them. Smoke hung over cities for days, supply lines unraveled. War production slowed, then faltered, then collapsed entirely. The Mustang, in the big picture, was more than a fighter. It was an economic guillotine. Meanwhile, in American bases, pilots returned with thousand-yard stares. The victory was real, but so were the costs. Friendships vanished in trails of burning smoke. Empty bunks haunted barracks. Letters home carried both pride and grief. A Mustang ace once wrote, "Every German I shot down bought an American a ticket and home, but I still see their faces when I sleep. War hardens hearts, but it does not make them blind." As spring of 1945 rolled in, something incredible happened in the sky silence. Missions launched with no sign of German fighters. Recon aircraft flew unopposed. By April, the Luftwaffe existed only on paper. A few desperate units flew suicidal anti-bomber attacks. Some pilots took off knowing their fuel would not be enough to return. Others simply surrendered their planes on the runway, raising their hands to the sky they no longer owned. And then Germany fell. When peace finally returned, the world looked to the skies with awe. The Mustang became a symbol not just of American engineering, but of a turning point in history when industry, training, and endurance crushed an empire's pride. Its silhouette came to represent liberation, strength, and the final breath of a war machine built on oppression. For the men who flew it, the Mustang remained more than metal. It was survival, a companion, a weapon, a miracle. American pilot Bud Anderson later said, "She could outrun, outclimb, and outfight anything in the air, and she brought us home." In museums today, Mustangs rest silent and polished. But if you stand close, if you listen, perhaps you can still hear echoes of those engines rising through winter air, cutting through flak and fear, carrying a generation toward victory, freedom, and the dawn of a new sky. And for the Luftwaffe, the lesson lingered long after the guns fell quiet. Empires fall not only to force, but to time, pressure, and a rival that refuses to break. When the smoke cleared and the engines fell silent, the battle for the skies over Europe left behind more than twisted metal and silent airfields. It carved a truth into history, one forged not only by machines, but by the men who dared to fly them. The P-51 Mustang did not simply defeat the Luftwaffe, it proved that courage backed by preparation, innovation, and unity can overcome even the fiercest power. Victory in the air was not guaranteed by heroism alone. The Germans had heroes, skilled aces, fearless, relentless. But courage without resources and strategy is like wings without lift. the Americans brought something different. Not just bravery, but endurance. Not just pilots, but a system of training, logistics, factories, and belief. Belief that tyranny could not be allowed to own the sky or the world beneath it. Every Mustang that soared into combat carried more than 6 guns and a Merlin engine. It carried the work of thousands of hands, every rivet a prayer from a mechanic, a mother, a machinist who gave their days and nights to the fight. It carried the faith of bomber crews who climbed into aircraft, knowing their lives hung on thin aluminum and the men who guarded them. It carried the sacrifice of pilots who climbed into the cockpit not for glory, but because freedom demanded someone take the sky and hold it. And it carried the quiet leadership of those who understood war is not won by the loudest voice or the sharpest blade, but by those who prepare hardest, stand longest, and refuse to bow to fear. In the end, the Mustang was a symbol, yes, but symbols are nothing without the souls who give them meaning. The men on both sides who fought in those frozen clouds deserve remembrance not just as combatants, but as human beings shaped by impossible choices. Some fought for survival. Some fought for liberation. Some fought for leaders history has condemned, but all faced death in a place where the ground was a distant dream and every heartbeat could be the last. So what, then, is the lesson written in Contrails Above Europe? That freedom demands vigilance, that innovation matters, that courage alone is not enough, it must be matched with discipline, sacrifice, and purpose. That history turns not only on strength, but on the combined will of many who decide. Together, that oppression will not rule uncontested. And perhaps most of all, that ordinary young men, hardly more than boys, can rise to extraordinary heights when the fate of millions rests on their wings. As you picture those silver shapes against a winter sky, ask yourself not as a witness to history, but as someone living in its long shadow. When the moment comes to defend what matters most, will we have prepared and will we have the courage to rise? In the end, the skies over Europe did not fall silent because one plane was faster or one pilot braver. They fell silent because a nation refused to surrender its ideals, because preparation defeated desperation, because innovation met courage in the cold, high altitudes over a wounded world. The P-51 Mustang did more than escort bombers. It shattered the illusion of Nazi invincibility, grounded an air force built on conquest, and opened the path to liberation across a continent choking under tyranny. On the other side, the Luftwaffe, once feared beyond measure, collapsed not in one moment, but piece by piece, pilot by pilot, until even the most experienced aces realized they were fighting the inevitable tide of history. The sun eventually rose over a Europe free to breathe again, and silent Mustangs taxied home to airfields where ground crews waited with weary hope instead of dread. The men who strapped themselves into those cockpits earned no easy victory, only the right to return, to remember, and to remind us that the cost of freedom is written in sacrifice. The Luftwaffe's reign ended, the Allies claimed the sky, and history forever remembered the Mustang as the winged blade that cut tyranny from the heavens.